Today, we're going to talk about DX versus FX, why I still think DX is a great way to go if you're on a budget or you got somebody just starting in photography. I'll show you a couple awesome DX lenses that I think everybody shooting Nikon DX should consider. And I'll talk about my testing protocols for lenses. Well, hey everyone, it's Hudson. Welcome to this week's video. I'm going to talk a little bit about lenses, about testing lenses. I'm going to showcase a couple of lenses I think those of you shooting Nikon DX should absolutely consider adding. They're just wonderful primes. And I want to talk a little bit about why people should consider shooting DX still. I know that all the glitz and glam has kind of gone to full frame, you know, with the Nikon ZF or the Z8 or the Z9. People are clamoring for the Z6 II, Z7 II. I kind of clamor for the Z50's update, and I still think the Z50 is a great camera, and I use it really, really frequently. And I think it is still the perfect camera. This little kit, so small. For those on a budget, or for those who want to travel really light, there's no better deal out there, in my opinion, than the Z50 with its 16 to 50 millimeter lens and its 50 to 250 millimeter lens. You can get this whole kit, the camera and both lenses, for $1,150, and that covers a full frame equivalence of 24 to 375 millimeters when you do that 1.5 crop factor conversion. So, and these are great lenses. You know, if you question that, I did a video a couple years ago where I only took this kit for stills with me down to Baja for a family trip and shot kiteboarding and wildlife and, you know, just our general family time there. I did a whole video about that, and you can look through those images. You know, if you doubt what you can do with a DX camera, I'll put the link to that right here, and I'll put it down in the video's full description as well. I still love the Z50, and you know, my son Pike, he loves taking photographs, and I set him loose with this camera, particularly with the 50 to 250 millimeter lens. And he does great work with it. You know, I've got it set up for back button focus. It takes great photos. It'll work in burst mode. It has eye detect autofocus. It has a lot of the mirrorless, you know, capabilities that we have today. Whatever camera system you happen to be shooting with, you know, whether it's Sony, whether it's, you know, another brand, Nikon, and maybe you're still with a DSLR and you're thinking about getting into mirrorless, and you think, well, I want to save a few bucks. You know, it really is important to me. The budget is super, super important. Well, there's nothing better for the budget than going APS-c. Whether you go Fuji, whether you go Sony, whether you go Nikon, the lenses, you get really high quality lenses for far, far cheaper. It's like every little thing after you buy a full frame body is more expensive to cover that full frame. When you think about it, the DX frame, if I turn this Z50 off and open it up, it's a much smaller sensor than a full frame sensor, and that enables the brands to make smaller, lighter, more affordable lenses that don't have to throw quite as wide an image circle at full quality to cover that sensor and capture the image. Again, it lets you create a kit like you can get right now, the Z50 with the equivalent of 24 to 375 millimeters for $1,150. If you want a lens that's the equivalent of this on full frame, you're going to be buying the 100 to 400 millimeter lens, which is more than twice as expensive as this entire kit with the body included. I think that a couple of aftermarket lenses that are available for this Nikon Z system sort of highlight that point. This is a little 24 1.7 that Nikon came out with for DX, and it winds up being about the equivalent of 36 millimeters on full frame, and it's f1.7, nice wide aperture. I wondered about it when it came out, so I ordered one. This is actually a little threaded on hood. I think it's 46 millimeters, and the actual filter thread on the lens is also 46 millimeters, so kind of nice. Whether you've got the hood on or not, it takes the same filter and it's flat out front. It's kind of a clever little design. Keeps it protected, the front element. This lens is $270, essentially $269, and its image quality is amazing. I'm about to show you. Edge to edge, the way that it transitions to out of focus details at that wide aperture, using this in low light, this is an amazing little lens. The closest thing you could get for full frame would be the 35 1.8 Z lens, which is way bigger and more than 3 times as expensive, or at least 3 times as expensive. So you know, that just shows you a little use case scenario. Another lens that's come out for the Nikon ZX system, and I'm going to show you some images from, that blows me away, is this entry from Viltrox. This is a 1.275 millimeter prime. It's, you know, bigger and heavier than you'd think of a DX lens, but a fraction of the size of Nikon's new Plena 135 1.8 or the 85 1.2 that exists for the Z system. It's, you know, a little bit bigger than the 85 1.8 of Nikon's, but way, way cheaper, and also just beautiful image quality, and it's 1.2. The out of focus rendering of this lens is superb. It's beautiful edge to edge, it's razor sharp. It's got wonderful handling. It still has a manual aperture ring, which I love, which can either have clicks or you can flip the switch for video and it's smooth transition through the aperture range. Locks into automatic for automatic. It's got nice crisp autofocus on the Z system. It's got a push button to be, you know, in Nikon's lens control function button. Nice manual focus control. It's a great little lens and way, 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 orders of magnitude cheaper than you can get anything that performs like this for full frame, right? I mean, like I said, you'd have to go with the 85 1.2 or the 135 Plena 1.8. This thing at 75 1.2 is about the equivalent of 115 millimeters on full frame, and it's just dropped up. In fact, let's jump in and look at some images from these two DX lenses. I think if you're shooting DX, you should really think about these on the Nikon Z system. All right, so I got some images here in Lightroom Classic from both of those lenses. I'm going to use my little metadata filter here and come down, and we're just going to look at ones from the 24 1.7 first. And I remember I got this lens just kind of wondering, you know, I was like, that could be a really nice lens for my Z50. And I have wound up just absolutely falling in love with it. Let me show you why. So I'm going to jump in full frame, and you can see what my settings are here. You know, this is the day that I got it, I think, or one of the very first days I got it. I had Pepper playing with Anna, who's one of my son Pike's classmates. And they were out here on our porch in the summertime. Let's see, it was right near the 4th of July, the 1st of July, I can tell from this. And, you know, just, I remember looking at this image and thinking, wow, you know, even though this is blown out, I love the way the highlights are rendered. I don't see any color fringing. I love the way the specular highlights are being rendered. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the 28 1.7 in my Leica, dare I say, my Leica Q2. You know, this is obviously at 24 millimeters on DX. It's more of a 36 millimeter, sort of that 35 millimeter classic rendering. Not a spectacular image, but nice and sharp. You know, if we zoom into 100%, you got that eye detect focus with the Z50. You know, and then my cousin Gabby brought my little nephew-like cousin Leon over, who's a preemie that joined the family this year and is doing super well. And I just remember, you know, taking a few photos of him and being like, holy cow, you know, for those kind of family things where you just want to have, you know, a little camera like the Z50 with its kind of normal 2-lens kit, I was like, whoa, this little 24 suddenly gives me a nice, fast 1.7 lens for that camera that's tiny, affordable, light. You know, it suits the camera beautifully. You know, I shot my little girl Pepper at our in August, and she's out there eating ice cream in the backyard, and we had our porch lights on, and I thought, you know, let's test how it renders those out of focus details. Beautifully is the answer. Beautifully. You know, the fall off, soft focus. Here's Pike sitting out by our picnic table with hydrangeas behind him. You know, made me think, we went on a little camping trip where we were hunting thunder eggs in eastern Oregon. You know, we're on a geology expedition. The kids are way into rocks and minerals, and we had a beautiful star-filled sky overhead, and I did a little bit of Milky Way work that night, and I just slapped the Z50 with this lens up and shot the Milky Way. Actually, I did this on the Z9 in crop mode on the Milky Way on my Move, Shoot, Move star tracker. So the trees are blurry because the star tracker is moving, but the stars are held still. I thought, well, let's have a look. And you know, honestly, there's some chromatic aberration at the extreme edges, but this thing does pretty darn well. You know, that you get the coma where the stars look like they have little wings in the very corners, but it's doing a pretty good job shooting night sky. You know, you get that 1.7 aperture is a pretty sweet thing. This is shot at 1.7. So, not even a bad star lens for those of you with a DX system, you know. But overall, I really love. Here's another, you know, bokeh. It's doing a great job with bokeh. Obviously, you know, you got a little bit of the sort of football shaped, and you know, but I mean, for a $250 lens, whew, come on, this is a pretty phenomenal imaging lens. And for those of you in the DX world, what a bargain. This is a great lens. All right, so going back into our grid mode, I'm hitting the G key. Let's go over and look at Viltrox's 75 1.2. This lens just sort of blew my mind. You know, it's a little more expensive, it's a little beefier. Obviously, it's a 1.2. And on, you know, on that winds up being the equivalent of what? You had 35, 110, 115, 120. It's, you know, it's beyond the 105 focal length. But when I got this lens, I was curious about it, and I took it out and shot, and I thought, you know, that's a nice and sharp rendering of Pike's eye with eye detect on the Z50, and the out of focus is just beautiful the way it's blown out the garden in the background. Shooting pepper in front of those same hydrangeas. Whoa, you know, I love the color rendition out of this lens. It's sharp where you want it. Not much vignetting wide open, I think you can see. This is little Stella, who we're going to visit in Australia, another sort of cousin niece, and she was in our backyard. Her folks were visiting us this summer. And whew, I mean, nice, sharp, beautiful out of focus details. Little Leon on a hand woven blanket, you know, one of the baby blankets, and just you can see me in his eye. Fabulous rendering. I just love the out of focus details in this. And it focuses nice and close. You know, this is all pretty much straight out of camera. A little bit of raw adjustments, but no cropping or anything. Rick wondering what someone during the Newport workshop's up to on the coast. Great portrait lens. This thing has wonderful rendering, and it's nice and sharp at 1.2. I mean, it is one of the nicer portrait lenses I've used. How's it handle flare, ghosting, chromatic aberration? This was just shot while we were running through the corn maze this fall at our pumpkin patch with the kiddos, and I was like, you know, I'll shoot it into the sun a little bit. Not bad, you know. You're not gonna, you know, this is a 75 millimeter lens. It's not a Sunstar lens, but at the same time, I don't see a lot of problematic chromatic aberration or anything from this, you know. And then that kind of this is just emblematic of what this little affordable DX lens is capable of. I just have to applaud the folks at Viltrox for making one that is absolutely a keeper in my DX kit, and I just could recommend without reservation to folks. I love the image quality from this lens, and you know that if you've got DX and you're looking for a portrait lens, woo! I mean, stellar. All right, so after that image review, I think you can see why I really love this Viltrox 75 1.2, as well as this little Nikon ultralight, ultra cheap 24 1.7. And you've actually seen a lot of views through this lens, because ever since I bought it, it's kind of lived on the video camera here in the studio filming this. I had to switch this out to the 28 2.8, which is nowhere near as nice a lens in my mind as this little DX 24 1.7. So there you go. We're that's enough of a plug, I think, for these two lenses. I just absolutely adore them. I'm actually I'm heading to Australia, and the next video you watch will probably include some portion where I talk about what I take with me. And I'm strongly considering not taking my 100 to 400 for the ZF, and instead just taking the Z50 with this lens, which weighs, I think, a little less than the 100 to 400 by itself, and it would let Pike and Stacy and Pepper have a camera to shoot around with when we're out with wallabies and kangaroos and things. I just think the DX system is a marvelous system. And, you know, again, brand agnostic. If you want to save a little money and you love Sony or you love Nikon, you might even consider Fuji. Look at what they're doing, because they have some awesome cameras in the XTs that are APS-c. So that's enough of my plug. If you're shooting Nikon, check out the 24 1.7 and the SP 75 millimeter 1.2 from Viltrox. I've got links to those, obviously, in this video's full description, as well as, You can just click up here, go over to ATS links. My ATS links page has links to all the lenses that I personally use as well as other lenses that I recommend. So I told you, I talk a little bit about how I test lenses when I'm on the fence about them. And I'm going to talk about a full frame lens for a second. Again, full frame just costs more, you know, when you're buying glass to cover that much larger sensor. Here's the ZF's bigger full frame sensor. But I have been loving Viltrox's 50 1.0 so much, and just enjoying manually focusing with it and having a little bit smaller kit to run around with than the Z9 with all my big glass. I thought, you know, maybe I'll try their little 15 4.5 and see if that's a great little landscape lens just to have in my pocket in case I encounter some beautiful type of landscape scene, or if I just want to shoot ultra wide angle and zone focus. I thought that'd be kind of fun. This lens is about $700, so I ordered it while I was in Scotland actually, and it was waiting for me when I got home. And I've been shooting with it for the past month, and I've just been a little bit on the fence about the image quality from it, you know, which sort of surprised me a little bit. I tested a bunch of Voiglander lenses for full frame when I fell in love with the 50 1.0 back in New York last summer, and that video is linked right here. There was actually a DX lens in that lineup, the 23 1.2, that I just loved. Fantastic image quality. It's a little more expensive lens, like $700, I think, for the APS-c for Nikon Z mount. But also just a wonderful, it's manual focus. All these lenses are manual focus, so a little more complicated, a little more of a retro, kind of getting back to the roots use case. I would definitely recommend for most people to just get this Nikon 24 1.7. That's what I wound up keeping. But I bought this lens, shot it a little bit, thought, I'm not so sure about it. And let me show you why and what I did to ascertain whether I was going to keep it or not. All right, so let's talk about this 15 millimeter f4.5 Voiglander. That it's set up for full frame, but you know, I was excited to use this with my Nikon ZF, my 24 megapixel full frame sort of retro styled camera. I thought, it'd be nice to have a nice little ultra wide angle lens for that. For landscape scenarios, maybe I just have it in the pack and I don't have to carry the 14 to 24, which is an epic wide angle lens for full frame. So I thought, you know, that could be a really cool lens. I love the 50 1.0 from Voiglander so much. I really like the 45, the 40 1.2, and I loved the 23 millimeter 1.2 for DX for that. These aren't cheap lenses, but I thought, this could be great for this camera. And so, you know, the minute I got it, as is typical, got it right after I got back from Scotland. I think I might have ordered it while I was in Scotland. I took it out in the backyard. Leaves are coming down. I got back in late fall. And I shot it, you know, f11, hyperfocal distance, that sort of, you know, zone focusing where you use the depth of field gauge and set infinity inside the f11 mark, and it's going to be as from close to you to everything at infinity in focus or appear to be in focus. That's the kind of work you can do with an ultra wide angle. You know, and as I looked at it, I thought, I noticed this looks like a bit of chromatic aberration and a fair bit of vignetting. If I zoom into 300% here in Lightroom Classic, yeah, not loving those highlight details. Sort of the opposite of my response to that Viltrox 75 DX lens that does so well with its highlights and not having much vignetting. I thought, this, for being stopped down to f11, seems like it's vignetting a fair bit and giving me some chromatic aberration. We'll close down this panel so we get a nice big view. You know, then again, nice rectilinear, you know, looking at the lines coming down into the corners on my patio and the way that, you know, it's rendering, you know, it's not terrible. And if you have enough detail in your frame, it's kind of hides some of those ambiguities. But then, you know, taking this portrait of my kids on the way to school, wow, noticing the vignetting. It seems heavy vignetting, and I don't like the chromatic aberration going in these trees. These are all just sort of straight out of the camera. I took this lens with us to the Evergreen Aviation Museum, which is where they have moved Howard Hughes' Spruce Goose, and they have an unbelievable number of historic aircraft and cool veterans to tell you all about it while you're there. Wonderful exhibit for those of you in the Northwest who haven't been. It's just really fun to go to. And then there's a whole nother complex with space stuff. This is a Titan I can't remember exactly what it is. It's a big rocket, and they have a whole, you know, exhibit where you can go down into by the rockets and see what it would look like in a silo. Super cool. This is actually an HDR shot with that lens, with Pike and Pepper, my kiddos, and their good friend Ransom. I had them hold still for a second and fired 3 frames in a burst, 3 stops over, 3 stops under on the meter, and blended them. And you know, when you've got enough detail, it kind of hides the fact that there's vignetting up here. And that maybe it's not quite as sharp as you dreamed of it being up there. This is a pretty complicated patterned scene. Yeah, it makes me think, maybe not so bad. But then, you know, I look at this scene of the lunar lander and I notice some vignetting and some softness in the corner. Same thing goes with this Navy helicopter, you know, bringing a Mercury capsule back. This is a really cool place to take your kids, by the way. It's pretty awesome. You know, looking at this rocket engine, you know, just not quite as sharp at f11 as I would love. And so, you know, what do? Well, my reaction to that is to run to my kids' school and do a lens test. You know, really look at this lens's performance against a brick wall where I can see the sharpness, see the patterning. And what I do is I set the camera up, and in this case, I took the Z9. Let's get 46 megapixels. Since I've been shooting with 24 and not particularly excited about it, how's it gonna handle, you know, 46 megapixels? So I put it on the Z9, took it up to the kids' school where there's a brick wall. There's a little bit of, you know, discoloration on the wall, but it's pretty uniform. And I set up level and shooting straight at the wall. And you can see, looking at these images, this is at f4.5, wide open. This is 5.6, this is f8, f11, f16, f22. We'll look at these in more detail, but you can see there's vignetting throughout. It's a little better at f5.6 than it is at f8 or 11. F16 and 22, as I'll show you, you know, also have vignetting, and then there's diffraction. Even diffraction starts at f11. So, you know, the fact that I want to use this lens particularly to have as a little landscape weapon in my pocket makes me start to think, I'm going to be disappointed as opposed to the 14 to 24. So let's just jump in. We'll jump into this, one that was shot at f4.5. Relatively sharp in the center, losing a lot of sharpness at the edge, and definitely vignetting. All right, so let's come back out. We'll look at f5.6. Still see vignetting, sharper yet at the center. Still not particularly sharp out at the corner. Let's have a look at f8. f8's getting pretty darn sharp. I think it's the sharpest in the center at f8. I think it's the sharpest in the corner at f8, even though it's definitely losing sharpness out there. Still got vignetting, without a doubt. Let's have a look at f11. f11's where I use this lens the most out in the landscape, just trying to maximize depth of field. Pretty sharp in the center, a little less sharp than it was at f8, I think, in the corner. I think it's starting to get some diffraction in the corner. Still has vignetting. Coming out to f16, definitely not as sharp in the center. Diffraction starting to play a role. Edge is getting quite a bit less sharp. It almost, sometimes a lens bounces back at its narrowest aperture, f22 in this case. Not in this particular lens's case, though. The performance drops significantly from f16. It's not particularly great. It would be only in a worst case scenario. So, you know, going back to look at all these images together, still seeing a lot of vignetting. Maybe not as much as wide open at f5.6, but you can see that oval shape, particularly over here where there's less patterning, and it gets a little less pronounced at f11, or at f8. This is 5.6, f8. Coming back at f11, in force at 16 and 22. I gotta say, there's enough compromises in a lens this expensive. I love its size, but it just isn't performing as well as some of the other Voigtlanders that I love. The 23 1.2 for the DX, the 40 1.2, the 50 1.0. Those are just special lenses. This one, the test just speaks volumes. All right, so I don't think it'll shock anybody after seeing that, boxing this 15 up and shipping it back before my return window closes. You know, there's nothing particularly wrong with that lens. It's just not as sharp as I'd like out in the corners, particularly for a lens I want to use in the landscape. And I've got my 14 to 24. Again, not a cheap full frame lens, but there's just no optical compromises with this guy. Razor sharp, edge to edge, even wide open. So, you know, this one would feel a little bit of a letdown for me, and $700, I'm just gonna keep the $700 towards the next thing. Again, you know, if you're on a budget, if those numbers seem astronomical and you really wanna get into the mirrorless world, think about DX, whether it's Fuji, whether it's Sony, whether it's Canon, whether it's Nikon. You know, I'm looking forward to an update to the Z50, but it's still an awesome camera. It shoots at a high frame rate, it has great dynamic range, has a beautiful viewfinder just like the Z6s and Z7s. And you can get, like I said, you know, 24 to 375 equivalent focal length, all with the body for $1150. Also, you know, this is the kit to get for, you know, that person just starting out in photography. And if you have the Nikon DX system, really strongly consider these Viltrox and Nikon primes. They're awesome. The 24 1.7 is just a no-brainer. The Viltrox, if you like to take shallow depth of field people pictures, this is an awesome DX weapon. It's even great for those of you with the Z8 or the Z9 that want to practice around at a slightly lower megapixel. It is just a great value. All right, everybody. So my family and I are off on a family vacation, taking a limited amount of photo gear. I'll share what I'm taking with me next week. We're packing up for it. We're spending time with family, doing a little kiteboarding in the sun in the southern hemisphere down in Melbourne, Australia. Looking forward to that. I'll share some tales from the road coming up. I hope everyone out there is enjoying the holidays, family, food, staying creative, staying safe. Have fun, everybody. And we'll see you next week.